Everyone enjoying CIFF so far? Yeah, a little quiet. Everyone just maybe a little hungover from Major Leagues last night. It's the bump in place on Saturday night in Chilliwack, I'll tell you that. I just want to take a moment just to recognize that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stolo people, and how thankful CIFF is for the continuous work that our Indigenous people do in the community of Chilliwack. So just a moment to thank them for that. Welcome to the panel. I've got three amazing guests. We had a good time just talking in the green room, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Wei. I'm the short forum programmer at Vancouver International Film Festival. That's like for Canadian shorts.
Cool. I'm Adam Keresztes. I'm at the Calgary International Film Festival, also CIFF, just a different CIFF. I'm the lead shorts programmer at that festival, and I have been for 4 to 5 years.
And my name is Jason Anderson, and I'm trying to think what my official title is lately. I think lead for Shortcuts, which is the Toronto International Film Festival's short film section. And so I've been there since 2015. I also do some features for TIFF now as well, and I also work for a couple of other festivals. I'm just working on the Kingston Canadian Film Festival and Aspen Shorts Festival right now as well.
So this is the place to be if you want to talk about short films right now. So I'm looking forward to this. My name is Matthew Hawkins. I'm from around Chilliwack, proud sponsor of CIFF for a number of years now. Can we give a round of applause to Taras and the volunteers that are they're killing it this weekend. And if you can, I said it last night, but I'll say it now too. If you see a volunteer with the CIFF, the Chilliwack Independent Film Festival logo on, like pat them on the back, shake their hands, because they are busting their butt and they're just doing such a great job. So thank you to Taras and his crew. To start off, why don't you guys talk a little bit about the short films that get submitted to your festivals? How many, and maybe the selection process that you guys go through?
Should I go first?
Yeah, why not?
I'm sitting closest to you.
Yeah,
Sure.
Well, for VIF, this is the past festival that just finished in October is my second year doing it. So this year we got 903 Canadian short submissions, and kind of a few others just kind of like will appear in my inbox outside of that. And we selected 42. So yeah, that's like less than the 1% margin. It's like so many short films, but in the end 42 made it. And like for VIF, like our kind of programming, kind of like curation, like I guess like mandate is to kind of support emerging filmmakers and kind of trying to find the spotlight of what's kind of coming out fresh from like art schools and film schools, also kind of like thinking of like the community we want to support like locally with an eye on what's happening kind of, nationally, I guess too. Yeah.
Yeah, at CIFF, we get usually around like 3,000 short films submitted from all around the world every year, and it's been growing a little bit year after year. And we usually end up with around 100 shorts in the festival. And usually the way that the shorts make it in the festival, we have about a dozen packages. These would be like thematic packages. So you'd have like a date night package or a late shift package, or themes that just like arise throughout all the films that are coming in. And so between those and a few shorts that get sprinkled in front of features, like thematic pairings, that's kind of how they get put into the festival. We also have a focus on Alberta film and Canadian film as well. And it's just films from all around. And there's not really like a vibe that we're always looking for. It's like kind of what's coming up year after year, year in, year out, of like the themes throughout the shorts that are being made.
And sorry, how many of the 3,000 do you pick again?
About 100.
100.
It's like, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to narrow them down to that. There's so many like great films out there that get made. It's just such a hard process to turn down really good films. But those are films that you think about. I don't know about the rest of you, but those are films you think about outside of the festival too. And if there's other opportunities in your city to like, if somebody's like, hey, we need some short films for something else, that's when you can maybe pluck those other films that you saw throughout the year that are like, oh, they didn't make it to CIFF. Maybe somebody else would have the opportunity to screen them in the city.
So 42 and 100. And
I know the math gets harder and harder. as it
Don't
goes
do
to
the
me.
math.
I know, and it's funny because definitely echoing a lot of what Adam and Casey have said already too. But I think one thing you really grapple with from a shorts as a shorts programmer, and I recognize this even compared to doing some features programming. It's like this, like the problem of abundance is vast and a large problem, just because like I think for TIFF, for shortcuts, which is actually one of two places two sections that usually play short films for TIFF. The other one is wavelengths, and they play strictly experimental. And so I think as a result, they'll play like very non-narrative work. And I think that as a result, shortcuts will play much more narrative specific work, but also documentary and animation and kind of interwoven with narrative and all the sort of different hybrids thereof. But we're looking at this year I think there has been a bit of a sort of post-pandemic. I know I'm not supposed to say post-pandemic because it technically is still going, but like that kind of post-ish pandemic surge. So we were looking at over maybe 5,000, 5,100 films, short film submissions this year. And for the last several years, again, there was a bit of a shrinkage because of the smaller festivals since the pandemic, like a lot of film festivals. So we're down to about 6 programs, which actually went up from the pandemic ones, but there were only 5 programs. So all told, approximately 40 films. This year we did 42. And like a lot of the festivals that are Academy qualified or Oscar qualified, if you know what those festivals mean, it's these festivals and a lot of amazing festivals. So if you actually are, one thing we'll talk about is kind of like, where do you send your film? And certainly one good guide is to actually look on the Academy's website and look at all these different festivals all over the world that are qualified festivals, which means that films that win awards there, particular awards sometimes, are now eligible for Oscar contention. Usually ends up with a pool of about 200 plus movies that are Oscar eligible after that. So, but one of the things is their time limit is a 40-minute max. So a lot of festivals have a 40-minute maximum as a result. So we'll play things from 2 minutes to 40 minutes. But yeah, so otherwise we're just sort of taking that 5,000 films down to 40-ish. And so of those 40-ish films, we roughly split between Canadian and international, because I think one of the big long tradition at TIFF of kind of the shorts being a place where Canadian filmmakers kind of have an entry point to TIFF or to wider festivals, and that's a big emphasis that we do, is that this is kind of a first point or a place where filmmakers are sort of beginning their relationships with TIFF or with festivals more generally, and it's very important to kind of find new talent and support new talent, and that's kind of a big place or a big objective for that. But it is hugely challenging because there's only so much room. And so I think I think if we get looking at slightly fewer films in Casey, because I'm not doing the experimental films, but still 750 to 800 films down to like 18 or 19 Canadian selections. And it's and that of those 18 or 19, we're looking for all kinds of diversity considerations, but that's also diversity of style and where is this film from, what kind of community is it from, what is it, do we have some animation and some documentary and some very like slick and some not slick and all these sort of different things. I mean, that is a big challenge, and I think we'll talk a bit about more of that too. But I think that when you have this sort of shorts program, you have this sort of almost like infinite options, and that's a big thing, and to sort of figure out kind of a way to have a lot of different things together in one place.
But maybe let's jump into that a bit, the selection process. And we'll start with Casey. Just you've got 930, you said?
Yeah.
And it's Canadian content that you're picking.
Yeah, we have an internationals program too, but that's a different programmer, and international gets I think over 1,500.
Like Adam mentioned it too, like kind of topics and themes, they change throughout every year, and things that you might be looking for. But talk about that selection process. What is it that you are looking for overall to narrow it down from 930 to 42? Right.
And I should say that the 900 isn't I don't start my job at 900. I started in earlier in the season where it's maybe around 200, 400. So it's a bit more manageable. And from that kind of it's kind of I think good to get, if you are able to get your film in early. So if it's a really strong film and you get it, the programmer to see it kind of early on, then they're more or I'm more likely to kind of think of your film and trying to if I really like it, build kind of around that, and kind of if your film has a very prominent theme about a certain like subject, and like that will be in my mind when I'm like looking at other films. So like I don't really go into the programming with like kind of like themes I want to hit. I just kind of like, you know, out of this kind of like breadth of like Canadian films that we get submitted, kind of like try to kind of see what are the threads that like collectively we're thinking about as like, you know, if we're going to talk about Canadian filmmaking, like what's going on kind of like across the nation. And like, you know, in the past year, like there were a lot of films about strangely birds, like animals in general, but specifically birds, and like parenting and parenthood, and just kind of like caretaking.
So do you find those themes just kind of happen naturally?
Yeah. Like they'll reveal themselves over the process of like previewing. And in terms of like selection, like I don't do it all by myself. It's like there is like a team of like pre-screeners who kind of like, you know, each get allotted like a certain number of films. And then they like we rank it through like a database, and then like I will do that myself too, like randomly watch films. But like with the team I'm working with, like I will watch anything that they rate like, you know, like a 6 out of 10 or higher, and then through that we kind of start building, like, you know, kind of whittling down to like you know, like by August, because the festival's in September, like sorry, by like June I should say, I have like maybe like 30 to 40% of the program kind of concretely, you know, in my mind. And then, yeah, just like we send out our first invitations and then like kind of build around these sort of like films that we're very sure that we want to program.
Yeah. Adam, what?
Yeah, just to what you talked about, like in 2022, I had a package about animals and I had a package about parenting. So obviously those are like themes that we're really working. This year we had one about like money struggles. Obviously that's on a lot of people's minds. So many people are making films about those things. So it is kind of, yeah, it's daunting looking at like 3,000 films. But we do have a team of like volunteer previewers from the city of Calgary that watch tons and tons of movies every week. Then they put their reviews in and those kind of bubble up to the top. But we're also jumping in, just watching as much as we can. Like I watch probably personally like 1,500 films a year, short films. Like it's a lot. I don't know about you two.
I watched 704.
Okay. Oh, exactly.
It's a measurement thing.
It's exactly. But yeah, so you're just kind of jumping in and watching. And to speak to what Casey was saying as well, getting your films in early is really important too. Just because if you are, depending on the festival, not all festivals operate this way, but if you have thematic packages, if kind of like my package is already starting to be like built out of like, hey, there's a cash package, there's an animal package, there's this, and then a really good film comes that it's like, oh, it doesn't really fit anywhere here. Maybe it won't make it in. But if you had that in earlier, maybe we could have built around it into a package. So I think getting things in early is really important as well.
So if you're taking notes about making your own short, I think that's both of you guys have mentioned that. Maybe Jason can agree. Like the earlier you submit it, it sounds like the better it is.
It's tricky. And actually, I was just on that same tip about titles. I realized I had 2 different movies with bird in the title this year and 3 with mother. So that was a big thing. But yeah, like I think in terms of like kind of when to send a film, I mean, for Jay's the process, I mean, and again, it's like I think when you were dealing with like these sorts of volumes, and again, I always think like 5,000 is a lot, but the number that always freaks me out is Sundance, because they say they have 12,000, which I don't exactly know how they get that many, because that's a ton. Anyway, but yeah, like I think like it is such a long process that I think and we have, you know, like a team of amazing screeners. I have an amazing program associate with me, and we're kind of, it's a multi-brain operation because of the nature of the work. And also just because of the kind of nature of you as a single viewer, all the kinds of lenses and biases and all these other things that you kind of, the different levels of knowledge. I mean, you really do have to rely on a large group of people, because you are seeing this incredible array and diversity of work. It's, I mean, from all over the world and all these different styles and voices. So you're really just trying to have to muddle through with a team of as best you can. But in terms of when, because like certainly, like because I don't do thematic packages, I mean, the only thing we're doing is just trying to have things that are different from each other. And so I think one thing that happens for us is that I try to, you know, delay decisions until very late, or as late as I can go, because I just don't know what's there. Like I don't know what we have until everyone's sort of gone through this enormous amount of material. And there's always these things that you'll feel very confident about early on because you love the film, and then like 2-3 months later you'll see something and be like, oh no, wait, this is this sort of slightly better version or something else that's going on in this film that kind of supplants this one. And that's one of the heartbreaking things, is that there's nothing wrong with that first film either. That first film is great. And I think when you're sort of putting together a lot of these films, things kind of edge each other, because inevitably there's going to be overlap between all these different films from filmmakers who have no idea that, someone else. I mean, the most extreme example, the weirdest example of that was one year where there were two terrific Canadian films, both of which had to do with a noxious pink gas that mysteriously appears in the movie. And there was no way it wasn't like a thing culturally going on about pink gases that they would have been responding to. They just happened to be. And I had one of the pink gas movies. I wasn't going to have both of them. and the other one did quite well too. The other one did circulate as a great filmmaker. So, I mean, it did okay. And that's sort of one other, thing is that, it's to sort of go forward is that, even not getting into festivals is not the end of a film by any means. And there's lots of...
Let's talk about that. So between the three of you guys, we're talking like a less than 5% chance of your short film getting selected. What kind of hope does a filmmaker have beyond not being selected?
Well, lots. And one thing, I mean, if you do care about Oscars and think, I want to have an Oscar-nominated short, hardly any Oscar-nominated shorts are films that went through the big festivals, like major festivals. And most of the films that were like big prize winners for Sundance or Cannes, Toronto, rarely would those be among nominees. A lot of those films that you see are things that maybe had, Netflix was behind it or whatever. That's a different case. But a lot of them were kind of things that kind of were at sort of smaller festivals and did well. And there's certainly, that's one thing I really, really encourage filmmakers to do, because if you're going out and you're looking at I really want to get these top 4 or 5 festivals, it's like, well, it's hard. That's like moonshot hard. I think, and there's so many festivals and so many great festivals that it's hard to know about. It really does take some research to find them sometimes, but they are out there. And there's and certainly festivals that are just play shorts. And there's a lot that just play shorts. I mean, not so many. I mean, I wish there were more in North America, but certainly in Europe and South America and Asia, there's lots of places for your film to be, and in places that you don't know about yet. And certainly to kind of keep, and to sort of, because you're kind of banking all that sort of feeling of validation is based on getting into a Sundance or a TIFF or something. It's so hard.
Are there some smaller ones that you can maybe recommend or that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for starters, I mean, places that have bigger festivals that play a lot of films, like Palm Springs in the U.S. is a big shorts festival and has a great market. In Canada, Regard in Quebec is the sort of premier shorts festival. And one thing I always recommend, if you should try to find out about festivals, is finding films that have been successful on the festival circuit in the last couple of years, and just figuring out where did those films play. I love this short, and it seemed to be something that did travel a lot, just to sort of, you can find out from their Facebook or whatever, or their Film Freeway, to find out where did that have a life. Because I've totally found out about festivals doing that too. It's just, there's a lot of festivals, and a lot of them are great. A lot of them have great audiences and great support, and they have kind of cool industry programming, and you just don't know they're there because it's, and there isn't really a kind of, one-size-fits-all kind of internet resource. And there's also lots of festivals that will scam you. That's the other problem.
Yeah. A lot of scam festivals.
Adam, some thoughts on filmmakers for hope with less than 5% chance of getting selected?
It is tough, but to say what Jason was saying as well, looking at other festivals, like smaller festivals too, there's a lot out there. Researching what they've played in the past is really important. So as programmers, it's kind of like your taste. You're kind of selecting to your taste, but you're selecting to your audience's taste. Mm-hmm. And all audiences are different in every city and every festival. They're all going to be very different. But I think I know my audience real well in Calgary. I'm sure you both know yours very well in your own respective cities. And so you're programming stuff that maybe it's not like my personal favorite film, but I think my audience will love it. And even if it's different programmers, that audience stays the same year after year. So if you go back and look at the archive of any of these older or other film festivals that you're looking at, seeing the types of films that they selected, and where does your film kind of fit into that world, right? Maybe it'll fit at this, you think oh, it's kind of like these films, and so they liked it there. Maybe mine would do really well at that festival. So things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Casey?
And I feel like there's this constant balance between how much of the professionalized research you have to do into kind of knowing what the landscape is and kind of trying to see how you might fit into it, but then there's also this other side of it where it's kind of just really working, I don't know, like just working hard on making your film the best it can be. And like as a shorts filmmaker, we don't have like enough, like we don't have the resources, let's say, as some of like to kind of realize a vision. Sometimes when you're thinking of a feature, like of course there's going to like get a lot of funding and blah blah blah. But then for shorts, it's kind of like sometimes the best shorts I see are the ones that are done with like very minimal resources and kind of like obviously very tight crew, very tight compact idea. And not to say it's the 3-minute film that will like wow me or something, but just like kind of looking at the form and looking at your team and looking at the best way to tell the story that is really true to your vision, and like kind of like critically reflecting, like thinking about what that story is and what that vision is in terms of like what is happening like right now in the world, what other filmmakers are doing, what filmmakers you like are doing, and kind of seeing how like your work kind of fits into that kind of like flow and that dialogue, because you kind of need to be very, like unique and different, but also you need to still be kind of like touching something in the cultural moment that like will kind of like satisfy like the audiences that we're like all kind of programming for.
Kevin Smith is one of my favorite guys that I've looked up to in terms of filmmaking, because he talks about like find an artist that you can mimic and kind of copy their style at first, and then learn to reflect it a little bit and then develop your own. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a little bit of what you're talking about, was just see what's out there, get a feel of what's happening, and maybe try and tell a story from your perspective. So that's really cool. I appreciate what you guys are saying. You guys, obviously, you could sit here and measure who watches the most short films.
Don't need to do that.
Yeah, these guys.
But you personally, Casey, what is it what sticks out for you in a short film? What makes you turn your head and say,
yeah,
like
that's so hard to put into words. Like, I think about the way I like program, and I know like, I think like Jason was saying this about how like we need, like as programmers, we need the team around us to like be able to be accountable to our communities, to be like to just like be aware of like my own like invisible biases and stuff like that. But like for me, I know I have a soft spot for like experimental film and like kind of film made on film, even though it's it's like scanned, but like and just like stories that kind of are like, I don't know, just like just when you can tell that the director's vision is very kind of like gosh, I'm just trying not to make like these like crazy generalized like philosophical statements, but just like really like kind of a strong vision that like is really just like every choice in the film like feels intentional, like to the point where like you don't notice that you've just watched like a 15-minute film after watching like 50 15-minute films, like that's kind of the only, I think, way I can define it. And I can only speak from it like from this perspective of being someone who has to like watch so many films that like I feel like in like this inhuman judging machine, like when it's like June, and I'm just like, okay, I have to watch like to like meet the schedule, I have to watch like 70 films today, and how am I going to do that? It's just like you turn into this sort of like kind of this like machine. So like a short that can like kind of break through that that just like mode that like I have to be in is just like aspiring to make something like that, I think.
So would it be safe to say that like, because you guys watch so many, that if someone's wanting to submit a short film to a festival, especially like say one of your guys's, they should be watching just as much as you guys are to get an idea of what's out there, so that they can find a way to cut through that sort of machine process selection?
No, I don't think it's healthy. I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because just to get an idea of what's out there, right?
I mean, I think we all like love film equally. I know we're like working in the industry in like different ways, but like I think just knowing what you really love, like whether it's like film or music or poetry, like I think over time you just kind of develop this sort of like sensibility where like you'll know how to communicate that the more well-rounded you are as like a person who like loves culture, because it's like so much of a good film is like in the sound or in the like the set design. So kind of thinking about the maybe just like thinking beyond the script, or how to activate your script, or however it is, whichever way you work, whether it's a screenplay or a script or like prompts, or like however you structure a film, and like kind of just really reflecting about like how to like communicate that like because we're making a film, so like visually and sonically, for me, like nothing like grates me more than like a really beautiful visual film, but the sound is like super off, you know, when the Foley's just like clunky or the mix is just like super like not. Anyway,
Adam, what sticks out for you?
Yeah, you can be forgiving with shorts a lot more, I think, because it is usually like newer filmmakers or people trying something new. But yeah, sound. Bad sound is tough to overlook.
It's at least half the video, right?
Yeah. But I think with shorts, timing is really important. Like the timing of your film, the pacing of your film. It's hard. Like we're talking about, we're turning down so many films, and that's really, really hard. But we're also giving opportunities to a lot of films. Like for my festival, it's like 100 filmmakers are getting their film into the festival. If you're making a 40-minute short, that's sometimes really hard to program in those festivals, because that could be 4 or 5 other filmmakers that you're giving opportunities to. So just thinking about making a tighter package. That's not to say you can't make longer short films, but just thinking more about like, does it need to be this long? Just thinking about those things with shorts, you don't have the forgiving amount of time that you have with a feature that people will be able to sit with, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny about forgiving, because I find that because I'm doing more features programming in addition to shorts, and I find like I'm way more forgiving with features because they can sort of like be a little more elastic in terms of pacing and intent, scene to scene. Whereas shorts, you need like you can't get a step wrong. You can't like misplace a step or whatever the phrase I'm looking for. Like I think I mean, again, like it doesn't have to be like super compressed. Like I'm thinking about how many long, languorous, sort of slow cinema films that I've loved and programmed, but even in those films, like there's a sense somehow that every beat of that movie has been considered and has to be there. Everything about like a 10-minute shot is important, and that it's, you know, whatever effect is. So I think there's something I call like clarity of intent. Like even if I don't exactly know what the filmmaker, like if they were holding information or something, but I just know that this has been considered somehow, that there isn't things that aren't in the scene or in a film that are just there because they just felt like they should be there. It's like everything has to be specific and important. And the other thing I've been kind of after watching however many, I'm thinking my career numbers. I don't want to think of my career. My annual numbers are like, but about the career. It's performance, and performance in kind of a broad sense, in the sense that it could be a documentary, it could be a non-actor, it could be a very well-known actor, it could be, you know, a combination, like, and same for documentary subjects. Like, I just kind of feel like, and I'm sure everyone here knows, like, when you're watching a film and there's that moment when you start a film and it's like, oh, there's someone interesting here, or there's someone who kind of feels alive on camera that is immediate and kind of visceral, and whatever they're doing, there's something about this person that I want to watch, whether they're a character within something or they're a documentary subject. There's something like magnetic, and often, like, and again, like this is something thinking about acting, like, you know, there was the idea that like faces, like really that screen acting is so much about faces. And I'm like, yeah, kind of just like drawn to faces. Like you have to have the right faces for a film. It's something as simple and as difficult as that. And so I think about the people I know who make films and the lengths people will go to cast their films, because I think that like, yeah, that's kind of like where you probably need to spend the majority of your energy to get the faces or the people or the bodies or whatever you need to have on camera, because that is kind of like such a make or break thing for me. Because I think that if you don't have the right people, the film is going to hit like, you know, maybe you'll get to I don't know, baseball. I'm not a sports fan, but I would come back to space. Maybe you can get a double out of this, but it's so important. And that's kind of, I think about like films I love, and it's like, oh, it's because of that performance, it's because of this person. And also, like, I was thinking about like the bad sound. For me, it's Bad Children.
Yeah.
Because that's hard. And I actually started to feel guilty because I'd come writing my notes and I'd feel bad about complaining about child performances I didn't think were good. So I came up with the phrase, the children are badly directed, because I didn't want to blame the children.
Yeah.
But it is. It's really, and certain kinds of performances are really difficult. And getting good kid performers or getting good performances, it's very challenging. But that's it. Like you kind of have to find your people, you know, somehow. And that's, I think, like the biggest thing I've noticed.
So from what I'm gathering, what you guys said, like, it's rather easy to make a short film hit. Like, you gotta have good sound. You have to have good faces. Less is more, right? Like, you don't need to be 40 minutes long to tell a short. It is incredibly difficult, not only just to get a submission entered into one of your festivals, but to like create a short film that hits. So prospective filmmakers that are out here, you have 2 minutes to tell them right now, what they should go do. Because for myself, I deal with corporate culture all the time. And I want to make something creative. And I come to one of these festivals and I get very fired up. I get very inspired. You guys have 2 minutes each just to give some encouraging words to filmmakers about getting out there and creating their short.
Please do continue to do so. Build your communities, build your, I think the really great thing about filmmaking, because I come from a more visual art background where filmmaking is so collaborative, everybody's super supportive and positive, and everyone works on each other's projects. So I think that's how over time, especially as somebody starting out, to not to watch every film out there to do research, and not to screen every festival out there to do research, but kind of research. The research comes from, I think, working together and learning how to be the right cinematographer for your friend's vision, and then in that way your friend will learn how to be your eyes or something when they're working on your film, because over time I think that the best, I think, filmmakers work with people who really understand their vision, and that takes time to develop. So I think it's about kind of the crew and the community you cultivate for yourself.
Yeah. That's totally true. I think yeah, just making films that try something new is really important, especially with shorts. Like you were saying earlier, it's you're watching, you might hunker down and throw on line up 20 short films that I'm going to watch over the next however long, and you watch 10 and you're just kind of oh my gosh. And then you get that one film that kind of shakes you up out of that does something different. I think that is really exciting, and that's something you can do with shorts a lot. You can be experimental. You can play with form. You can play with different styles. You can do something maybe you've never done before as an artist. And trying something new with a short really can get programmers excited about that and seeing new things.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I certainly echo those points. And the other thing I was thinking about was again, sort of having done shorts for a while and sort of met a lot of filmmakers, and been really excited to hear about kind of how they made their films and why they made their films. And one of the things that always comes up is how incredibly personal almost all this work is. Really even, maybe especially when it sort of ends up being kind of allegorized, where it's something, maybe it's a character that's not like this person in front of me. But I can see that whatever this been sort of transposed into this other life. But there's I think that's something that you can tell when you're watching, when something comes from a really deep, I was going to say raw. It doesn't have to be raw necessarily, but it comes from a deep place. And you can see that the work has a very specific meaning, or there's a question, or there's some emotion, there's something that's really kind of coming from deep in the personal well of an artist. And that's something they're kind of really trying to get at. There's a real stake in it. And I've seen that kind of stake. I mean, the stake itself can manifest in any number of ways, any number of kinds of stories. But I think that's something, when there's a real kind of core concern or question that an artist has, and that's present in the work that they're trying to kind of express or sort out or whatever. To kind of have that, kind of, it brings a real intensity, I think, even if it's a quiet intensity or whatever. But I think figuring out how something is personal, right? Because you can tell when someone's just kind of trying something out because it seems like a slightly cool idea, or they're maybe sort of trying a story that really doesn't have much to do with themselves, and on some level. So I think that's something I always encourage, is just what are your stories? I mean, however you want to tell those stories is up to you, but kind of what are those things of you that are important to express?
Can I say one more thing on this?
No.
Please do. Fill out your film freeway bio.
Yeah.
Or about your film. That's really important. I think we do say films do speak for themselves. And initially this is what I do, but I'll just watch the film. Don't look at anything. I'm going to watch the film. But if it does speak to me and do something, fill out that bio, because that's where you can explain a little bit about context, why you made it, troubles you came up with, all these different things. I had one locally made film that I watched, and I was yeah, this is pretty cool, interesting style, really liked it. And then I read that it's an engineering student at University of Calgary. They won a robotics class, they did a contest, and they won $20,000. And they were I'm going to spend this money to make a movie. out of anything, and they never made a movie before, and this is the first movie they ever made, and it was amazing. And that like adds some context to sometimes something that is already pretty interesting to you, but then it kind of like jumps some things up a little bit, or it can.
I was going to throw a caveat on that, though, which is the times I've actually kind of been thrown by something I read in a cover letter or a director's statement where I just think, oh, that's a really important piece of information that is not within the text of the film itself. And it's a bit different for experimental film because a lot of things will happen sort of beyond the text of the film. There's sort of in visual art, there's sort of a different relationship. But I find that if it's a narrative piece and there's something that is kind of like an intent or something that is like mentioned in the supplemental material, and I'll be like, oh, you should have figured out a way to get that in the movie because that you've created and I realize that that's an issue. So that's something to watch out for. If it's a really important piece of information, make sure it's somehow within the film too.
Just touching on what you said, Adam, like one of my favorite interviews is Tarantino with Letterman, and he talks about like, forget film school, just pick up a camera and start going to town. Like, what sort of encouragement do you have for people? Like, maybe they feel they have to go to film school. They got to do like a year at Vancouver Film School or Capilano here locally or whatever else is across the country. What sort of encouragement do you guys have that people, like you mentioned, like a guy that's never made a movie before gets $20,000 and decides he wants to make a short film? What sort of encouragement do you have to people to get out there and start filming? Like, what do you have to say?
Just to do it, like you can shoot something on your iPhone these days or whatever camera device you have. It's all very like I think more accessible than it was like even like 10 years ago. So even if it's just like little sketches, just like kind of like ways for you to practice how you're framing, what shots are appropriate for different scenes you want to communicate, and just getting confident in like kind of like working on I guess like your aesthetic. Just it all comes from practice. So I would just say to do it whenever you have free time. I mean, you will make free time if it's like you're a filmmaker, right? So
if you want to do it, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, it is about practice, and not like you don't have to go to film school, but you might want to go to film school. Like these things, it's up to you, and it's like how you learn, how you develop your styles, I think is really important. So not saying like film school is the worst and you should just go watch movies, and not saying like you have to go to film school. It's a balance between like the type of personality you have or how you want to develop your art, I think is really important. And you kind of talked about this earlier about like watching every film that's out there. I agree with that. There's kind of two sides of like very good filmmakers are like the Tarantino like super film nerd that knows everything about film, and then the people that never watch movies. Like they barely watch movies and they make amazing films.
Because it just all came from their brain.
It just comes from no influences, and it's just like raw of like personal energies or like things you want to explore. And so just balancing those things. That doesn't mean like if you're kind of into film, you can't make good movies too, but I do see those dichotomies are kind of interesting.
I was trying to think about, like, do you need school? I think the best thing about school, from what I've seen from filmmakers who I think have been, like younger filmmakers have been successful or kind of had good momentum. Like a lot of them will like school's kind of like about them. They got out of school that I can tell is they found their people. Like they found their peers, or they found their kind of like their the people who are going to kind of go with them. And I always think about that because like I'm very aware of like schools and like there'll be sort of pockets. I mean, literally like I'll know that like, okay, there's this one particular year at like Columbia University, and it's like, okay, I know these filmmakers who are all like friends, often like international students from all over the world, but also like, oh, here's that people. And there have been like sort of, like successful first features in recent years, like Joyland was one, but I was thinking about After Sun, and that was Charlie Wells. I went to NYU, and I'm like looking at the credits. I'm like, oh yeah, I know that filmmaker, and I realized that they were kind of like still making films together, right? They'd kind of like switch roles, but I think those are the kind of really, because they're making films with their friends, and that's kind of like a really important thing. It's not like because you need your friends, you need to have a kind of micro community to do work, because it becomes very hard to do on your own. So I think school is definitely a place where you can find people. And it doesn't have to be school. It can be like collectives. It can be any number of sort of, but just to sort of, or just, volunteering for other sets, or just meeting other people who are making films, just to find people who can help you and you can help. And because it's just going to make it a much richer, experience for you, hopefully a little easier.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add here before we turn it over to the audience? Because I feel like people want to ask a lot of questions. So
I would just say don't make a 40-minute short film because it's impossible to program. It's actually impossible to program. I don't even know why it's like up to 40 minutes. I think like the longest short I've programmed is like 26, 28, and that's like really pushing it. Just because it kind of takes up too much like just durational and like emotional space in the program. It's like really hard to, I don't think it's really hard to
just Tim is in the booth there. Tim, we should give him a round of applause for Cowork. This is all his place. Tim put all this together. Thank you very much, Tim. I've done a lot of work with Tim, and one of the best lessons that I've learned from Tim in terms of video production is edit ruthlessly. If you can tell the story in a minute and a half instead of 3 minutes, do that, because you want to leave your audience wanting more, not wishing there was less. And so, yeah, why go for 40 when you can do it in 26 or 13, right? Like
so many of the Oscar-nominated films are those like 38-minute short.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
don't listen to
Which
me
is
then.
really
Yeah.
frustrating. But it's a different thing, right? And it's like, if you're making a film and you want to go to film festivals, maybe that's the right approach. But I hear from some filmmakers, it's like, I wanted to make a short to show off that I could do something that's 30 minutes long.
Yeah.
Because I want to get into episodic television, or I want to do this and that. And so maybe you're making a film with a different intent. And maybe that's not for film festivals. Maybe you're making a short for other reasons. And then maybe those aren't ones that necessarily need to go to specific film festivals.
That's a good point. So,
And you can make a film that is for film festivals, that you want to get on that stage, you want to become an alumni to a festival, because then you're in conversation and then you're at the table and you're like be able to snowball your career into other things. But there's different ways to make shorts and different ways to distribute and get people to experience your shorts.
And I have an important thing. Again, you think about these sort of time limits, the influence they have. The fact that the Cannes competition, which is a big deal, has a 15-minute max, that drives a lot of work to be 15 minutes long. And sometimes people will take the films back, especially if they didn't make it into the competition, and kind of add some minutes back. But I see a lot of work that's at that like 14 minutes and 59 seconds because there's so many filmmakers who really are gunning for a Cannes spot, and they know that's it. And there's lots, and it ends up being a film. I've played lots of those films over the years because it's a very kind of playable length. It's not the only length, but certainly if you want to play Cannes competition, 15 minutes is what you got.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Cannes is what? They chose 11 films this year.
Yeah, and it's
Who knows how many they get.
and it's
That's
brutal
insane.
because they play them all together, so you end up sitting there for like a 2-hour plus screening, which is difficult. I really feel bad because those last few films are just getting like the audience is totally checked out. And I swear, if you went back, you could probably find that all the people who won the contest were like in the first like 3 films, because it's the back end's not. You don't
Everyone's
want to be in the back
fresh
end.
and ready.
Yeah.
Well, if, you said Sundance had 12,000, I can imagine
Yeah, I don't even want to know
how many
Cannes
Sundance
has.
has. Yeah. We're going to turn it over to you guys right now. Darren, the professor, is there with the microphone. So if you have a question, please speak into the microphone because we are recording all of this. So why don't we start at the back with that yellow toque there, Darren? He's nice and close to you.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. I'm just wondering. So, what do you do if you have 2 films that have like completely different tones and plots, but the titles are similar?
Oh, you can play both. The title's not really as much of an issue. I'm sorry, jumping in. I think it's like really like maybe you just have to like put a little brackets like 1 and 2 or something.
Yeah.
Like I think the regular issues you have to have something that's sort of tonally or like plot similar or whatever. It's like, or it's the same. Like that's the challenge is when you have 2 great films that are just a little too close for whatever reason. You just feel like, oh, I kind of can only take one of these, but they're both great, and that's the challenge. I think I wouldn't have any trouble playing the same film with the same title. I don't think that would be a problem.
We've had titles like films in the festival with the same title, and you just do that little 1 brackets. But it maybe is confusing for audiences. I don't know. But yeah, tonally and thematically, that's always the hard one.
Yeah.
Is if things are like 2 are very equally the same movies, similar length, similar themes, and it's like, how do you choose one of the 2? That's always very hard. And sometimes it's a coin flip, honestly. No, I'm just kidding. You don't do coin flips. But you watch them. You watch them again and again.
Sure.
And then this is where your film freeway bio can kind of come out, right? Maybe there's something in there that maybe sets it apart from the other film.
Little background info.
Yeah, sometimes that can help.
I don't have
no coin
anything
flips.
to add to that because it's never happened to me before, but now I know what to do. 1 and 2.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Darren, I'll let you just select it because you're the man with the mic.
Hey guys, I'm a documentary filmmaker. Do you have any specific advice for what you look for when programming short documentaries, if that's your ballpark?
That's a really good question too. I think one thing is we talked a little bit about that, but certainly context matters. And I think that for me, as someone who's programming a mixed set of films where I have documentaries playing alongside animation and narrative, I find that there's certainly many strong documentaries I'll see, but I'll be like, yeah, this kind of needs like a documentary program to really work. It needs to be in a documentary festival or a specific documentary program. Like there's certain kinds of documentary that I know like fit with what I do within these programs, and it kind of is more like character study or observational pieces. If it's like, stuff that's maybe, with a lot of interviews, or it's sort of more or very kind of news magazine-y style stuff is harder for me to play. So I think the stuff that does well for certain, it depends on the festival, because certainly there's festivals that will have, all kinds of documentaries, but even very documentary festivals can be very different from each other too. Like there's like some European ones like Vision de Rio, which are very hybrid and very high art style documentaries versus, festivals like or Big Sky will have a lot of different. I mean, it kind of again depends on the kind of audience and the kind of festival it is. But I think for like a lot of stuff that sort of succeeds in, let's say, the big festivals, like a lot of those will be kind of more that sort of observational kind of maybe essay, maybe like it's like there's certainly lots of good good docs I see that I'm like, yeah, this is great, but it's more of a doc fest piece. I don't really figure out how to put it together with my stuff. Is that sort of similar?
Yeah, we do program that kind of stuff because we have more opportunity to have more films. Like we have 50, 60 more films than both of you. And we do a lot of documentaries. But there are those documentaries tend to be longer too. Like in general, I think documentary shorts are usually longer, like those news magazine pieces you're talking about. But there's still a lot of really great documentaries that do some interesting things with style and form and maybe doing some animation. It's not just like talking head documentary, which has its place, but you need a really engaging and interesting topic subject to make a talking head documentary work. Whereas like doing something that sets you apart and does something stylistically different allows us to put them in different spaces. Like in my packages, we usually do one full documentary package, but I like to sort of sprinkle some in. Like I try to throw one doc in almost every package to kind of like shake people up a little bit, but that has to be something that fits with the package. And so maybe something that's stylistically a little bit different would work than just like a pretty basic talking head documentary.
I guess I echo what you both are saying, but I think maybe I can add to that. Like for me, what comes up, I guess, a question that comes up with documentaries a lot is like, what is the director's relationship to the story? Sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes I need a little bit more context. And that's what you're saying, the bio or the director's statement is can be helpful to know, like, what is the director's kind of like skin in the game or connection to the community, to know that like the documentary is done kind of in a way where like is the ethics of filmmaking come in, where like is the film just like a vehicle for the director, and then this community that is being kind of like given the spotlight to, how will they be kind of like benefiting from this documentary in any way, or how is that relationship made kind of in a whole like fulsome ethical way? So those are kind of questions I ask myself with documentary. Yeah.
Darren's making his way around there.
Thanks for the insight, guys. I kind of had a two-part question. I guess in terms of submissions, you talk about the director's statement. How does that differentiate from the cover letter? Because sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself. And at that stage, if you've already watched the film and then you're getting more insight from the director's statement, at that stage, is an EPK of value to you if the quality stills are separate from that as well?
I feel like I keep talking first, but you left me no choice. I think it really is like, I hear about EPKs or that sort of supplementary material. Like it can be helpful. A lot of that stuff doesn't really become important until the film is kind of selected or it's getting some momentum. So I think it's kind of, if there's ever a point where that stuff, that the energy that goes into that could be going into the film, then give it to the film, because that stuff is really going to be, that's kind of like a more minor issue. And certainly like if people are like, oh, do I need photos or EPK or this, or don't really need that material. I mean, it's good to have it kind of getting ready, because you're ready if you start to get selections. But I think that even if repetition, like I get, plenty of repetition between a cover letter and a director's statement, and it doesn't really, or a director's bio, doesn't really matter to me. I suppose it might matter to some programmers, but I think I think most programmers will say like, it's the film. Like, is it all? If the film is like a great director's statement's never going to save a film that has problems. It's kind of so. I think that there's only so much energy or time you should be putting into those supplementary materials, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, I think like the director's statement is kind of like context, or what you're saying, like connection to whatever the material is. And yeah, people, I do see a lot of that where it's like, yeah, cut and paste the director's statement into the cover letter. But what I find the cover letter more useful for, because that's more for like your individual submission. So like, let's say you make a film and you're submitting it to Calgary, but you're from somewhere else, but maybe there's a connection to the city, or a connection to the festival, or a film that maybe you did the research and you looked at Calgary, and we played a film last year that you used the same composer. Like that cover letter can give like some context to the festival itself, where the director's statement is more like, or that's what I like to see from it. The director's statement is more about like the film itself. If you're talking like differences between those two, does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add to that. Yeah, covered it all.
I don't know if you want to come up here, Darren. I don't know if we'll get to everybody today. Sorry.
I'd like to know your thoughts on programming proof of concepts. Do you consider them often, or at all, if not at all?
Why don't we start with Casey?
Yeah.
Sorry, what do you mean by that proof of concept? I'm not even sure what that means.
Like kind of just like a proof of concept for like a feature film, like if it ties
Oh, I see.
to like a nice neat bow at the end, that's like well rounded enough for you to want to program it. Would that be something you would still consider, even though it's not just a short, it goes beyond that?
I think for me personally, I would always consider it, and if it fit in a program, definitely. But I think generally, more interested in short films that are kind of like made to be a short film. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no problem programming stuff like that. You see a lot of it come in where it's like, this is clearly a proof of concept for a feature, but it can still be a fully like encapsulated thing, but maybe open-ended or something. What I don't really like is putting like a to be continued at the end of the short, because throwing that in
happened?
Yeah, that happens a lot. And like you put that in a shorts package, that would be super weird. Like the fourth one in a package, it's like to be continued. It's like, what is this? So you could do that if you want to like then release it out to YouTube or something later. But when you're submitting it to a festival, is a different thing. Kind of like what I talked about earlier about like, what is this for? What is this film for? If it's for festivals, so.
Yeah, same thing. Like I see a ton of those because especially for American, if you're doing a lot of American content, because it's a pretty popular thing, and that's to a lot of filmmakers, starting out in the States, it's like that's what a short film is for, is to sort of sell your feature. And sometimes it works. And I think the stuff that most works is not like the sort of like to be continued, where it's just like the setup and then it ends. And it's like it needs to have a beginning, middle, and ending. But there are lots of successful examples of people where they just take a scene or a piece or some sort of like segment. Like Whiplash is a famous example of that short, which I think they had the feature ready more or less, but then they just had this great scene that they used. There was one that went at Sundance called The Vacation, which was, I know, like the filmmakers working on the feature. Like there's certainly examples. You just kind of have to, like, if there's a standalone piece, that's great. If it's a proof of concept, it's more like a sizzle reel or even like a trailer. That's usually not something that a festival will play. Although genre festivals might. So that's something, because I think there's maybe more of an audience for it there. But if it's stuff that you're playing against things that have beginning, middles, and endings, that's hard. It's too weird. Yeah.
Hi, just going back to like the submission process, because a lot of the time, filmmakers, or for myself, like we film like pretty much like after film or do another one. But what I've learned for myself is like don't make a deadline because of a festival. So I'm just wondering, like for example, I missed a couple like TIFF, for example, or VIFF, because I finished the film like in August where clearly the deadline's passed already. So like what's your advice for filmmakers to like, hey, I want to submit to TIFF or VIFF, but it's already past the deadline. How can, yeah.
Like you could submit it to the following year. Because the I think the deadline is kind of brought wide enough that you could, like, if your film finishes in like late 2023, it'd be eligible for like 2024, that kind of thing. But also like sometimes this is successful, sometimes it's not, but like kind of submitting just like an earlier cut and then like kind of having this caveat of like, this is a work in progress, it's like 80% done. And if it's, kind of strong enough to make the programmer like ask for like the cut, the finished cut in like August, we will do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that like it kind of like one thing that breaks my heart is when filmmakers kind of like sit on a film for a long time because their dream festival, like the timing didn't work. Because I always feel like it's just sort of bad for the soul to kind of like just I think because there is a kind of natural timing, and I find that like for instance for a lot of Americans they want Sundance most of all. It's like their big dream festival for a lot of people, so they're kind of finishing 4 Sundance deadlines in whatever late September. So and for Europeans and other people elsewhere in the world, it's like Canada, it's mid-March, and for TIFF and sort of thereabouts a couple other festivals, it's kind of like getting into sort of like May and June, and I feel like it's just like I think to kind of just start trying to give it a life, and if you do want to hold on to it because it's like you have your dream festival, then you make that choice. But I think it's really hard. I mean, but yeah, otherwise I'd echo what Casey said. Like if you think it's close enough to ready to submit like an early cut, a rough cut, then do. But that I always caution people because if it's really rough, then you have the risk of kind of hurting yourself by sort of showing a film that's too like embryonic or not quite formed yet. It's not there yet. And maybe a festival is going to let you resubmit the following year, maybe not. So you just have to sort of kind of gauge like is the film is it close enough to share? Yep.
Thanks so much for coming today. How important is it to build relationships with programmers at different festivals, especially programmers for festivals you haven't been accepted in the past? Like, does that have an impact in your submission success?
You start.
Me. Yeah, I think it is important to, like I said before, like getting to know the programmers and their taste or their audience's taste to be able to get into festivals. But at CIFF, like once you get into the festival and you're alumni, you're kind of like a known commodity to it, and you get the opportunity to then submit for free all of your films forever until the end of time, basically, because you've gotten into the festival once. That doesn't mean we're programming like only returning people. There's a lot of like giving new opportunities, but creating those relationships can be important. And as from a programmer's perspective, you're kind of like watching filmmakers progress through their career. Like if I program something like 5 years ago and then somebody's coming back, I'm going to be like, okay, how does this compare? How have they grown in these last little time? And I think that's important to like share with the programmers. And then also as a programmer, you kind of need to learn from that.
Yeah, I would say it's like helpful but not essential. Like if you're able to kind of get to the festival and to meet the programmers, that's always like nice, like what Adam said, to like build those relationships. But I understand that's also kind of like it's not super accessible for a lot of people. And as the programmer, I like as a human, I'm quite like introverted, so but I try my best.
I have 3 really quick questions. First one. Deadlines. There's early bird deadline, normal deadline, and late entry. Is the late entry just a cash grab? Because by the time the late entry comes through, you guys have made most of your decisions, it sounds like. Regarding multiple entries, in 1 year, we can make a lot of really great short films. Do you know this if someone submits like a lot of films? And close to his question, what if we're submitting, is it even possible that you guys accept if we submit films to you directly, maybe with a PR package, Instagram? People are doing promotional campaigns for short films now, like a feature film, the whole Instagram, the whole everything. So, deadlines, multiple entries, and direct submission.
It's not a cash grab. It's just harder because there's less spots there. Next one.
It isn't a crash grab, but it is higher because it's super late. And we don't want to be like, we're already trying to be done. We watch so many films that we don't want to be watching more and more at the very last minute. So it is a higher price to deter people to be like, hey, get it in earlier. Yeah. We'd love if everybody did early bird. Then we'd have way more time to make our decisions. And then you'd save a lot of money. But that's not how filmmakers work all the time. It's like last minute things.
And I'm going to try to answer questions at the same time. Yeah, same thing for deadline. Like I think that because I think there's actually often a very significantly long gap between the deadline and when you're actually selecting the films because there's so much more work you got to go through. So I think the idea that it's films that are getting submitted earlier, getting selected earlier, usually not the case. Usually it kind of just you kind of have to go through everything and kind of hash it out amongst whoever the sort of deciding programming committee is. Like everything kind of ends up at the same place, which is different for features because that can happen. Like late films are losing spots. But what was the multiple one again? I forget.
Multiple submissions from a team.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, you end up possibly competing with yourself because it's very rare for to get 2 different films in a festival.
Yeah.
So you may want to hold on to one of them and try a different festival. But by all means, it happens, and I always get multiple submissions by certain teams. Now I'm forgetting the third question.
Right submission.
Oh yeah, sort of campaigns. Campaigns, I think, are kind of often be a waste of energy unless your film's already getting selections and unless you really are gunning for Oscars, which that's sort of happening right now. I know people are involved in Oscar campaigns. I think to do it early, and again, it depends what your objective is. If your objective is to have a successful viral film, then by all means start doing that. But I think if you're trying to do it for festivals, then that's not going to get you into Sundance or whatever. I think it has to be about the film. And I think if it's something that's already hot online, that might be a disincentive because it's it's already kind of living online. It doesn't really need festivals, or isn't really. That's not really where the film is living. So.
Can we take a moment just to give a round of applause to Casey, Adam, and Jason? Thank you so much, guys. That was fantastic. Thank you to Tim and Cowork. You guys just kill it in here. This place is amazing. We love it. That's going to wrap up our panel. You guys are awesome. Honestly, we could sit here for another hour. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.